like to ask you all to join us in the room and please take a seat. So we're off to a great start. Had some really interesting presentations just before the break and some good questions. And I think one of the overall themes I think we're seeing is that even though economics is really driving this energy transition, decarbonisation is becoming a key issue and will kind of catch up a little bit in terms of being one of the key drivers for mining's energy transition. So that was really interesting to hear this morning. So now we're going to move on to a conversation about the energy challenges and options for new and existing mining operations. And I'd like to invite our next panel to stage, Matt, Greg, Paul, Brian, Stuart, and Keith to join me on stage. And we're going to get our little game of catch going towards the end of this. So please have your questions ready. And I'm just going to suggest that as we're having questions, just please put your hand up if you have one, and we'll try to, when the question is being asked, to then throw the mic to the part of the room where the next question is, just to kind of ease the flow of the conversation. So it's my pleasure to introduce Matt Curry. Matt is Business Development Manager for Zenith Energy, and which specializes in designing, constructing, and managing power generation facilities, and in particular, off-grid hybrid systems for remote mining operations.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the conference. So I think what we'll do is just start by each person sort of providing a brief introduction of themselves. So what I want to do is just pass you straight across to Keith Ashby. Here he is.
Thanks very much. Thanks to everybody for being here. I understand it's a hard gig immediately after lunch. So Keith Ashby, I'm head of HSEC and Risk with Independence Group, or IGO as we like to call ourselves, and among other things, I'm responsible for the way in which we're actually going to move forward in a sustainable fashion. So looking forward to the conversation.
My name is Paul Smeedy. I'm Vice President of Corporate Development at Sarumba Resources. We're a explorer/developer gold focused in West Africa. Our primary project is in the southwest of Burkina Faso. I'd describe it as an advanced stage exploration project, so we're just about to get into feasibility type work, pre-feas, and we've got a number of different configurations in terms of the project design that we're looking at, so very interested to hear what sort of power solutions are out there, given our site's quite remote and power costs, self-generated power costs for that matter, are very high.
That's cool. Greg Cochran, CEO of Reward Minerals. We're the owner and aspiring developer of Australia's largest sulphate of potash project or deposit. It's called Lake Disappointment. It's 300 k's east of Newman in the Pilbara. So a tough environment from a location point of view. The tyranny of distance kind of weaves its fabric throughout our cost structure, and obviously being out there delivering energy solutions is actually really challenging. In one respect, I guess you could say the good news is that we are in effect a solar operation. If you take into account how much water we evaporate on an annual basis and had to try and do that mechanically, you would be talking about 4,500 megawatts or so. And yet our actual plant itself that produces the product only requires about 14 megawatts. So it's kind of, you could say, 99.5% a solar operation. That being said, the trucking of the actual product itself to Port Hedland, 866 k's away, and the harvesting of waste salt and crude potash is expensive, and so we're looking for not only plant solutions in terms of hybrid potentially, but also alternatively listening to and learning from the new ideas around hybrid trucks, or hydrogen trucks, etc. as well, to drive down our footprint. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg. I'm Stuart McCallion. I'm the project manager for Australian Potash. We are an aspirant in the sulfate of potash space as well. We're developing the Lake Wells potash project, which is about 150 k's northeast of Laverton. You know, we mirror exactly or reflect what Greg has said too. Obviously, we're dealing with already a brine evaporation program, and it works in these environments. You don't see these happening in the tropics or in more temperate climes. So the peak demand is our power demand is out of our plant, and it's not a typical met plant. It's a chemical plant where we're dealing with heat exchange. We don't have quite as big as operation as Reward, but it's you know, so we don't have quite the harvesting fleet, and we're also using on playa evaporation ponds where we're able to leave the salt in place. But it's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm very encouraged by some of the information that I'm listening to.
Thanks, Stuart. Brian Williams, Group Manager, Environment and Aboriginal Heritage at Western Areas. Western Areas being a mid-tier nickel miner, main operation based in Forrestania. But excitedly, we're reopening the Cosmos mine up next door to Mount Keith, which has a 10+ year mine life to it. So it's a good opportunity for us to really sit back and look at our energy mix for Cosmos with a 10-year mine life. So we're currently looking at hybrid renewable solutions versus our gas supply. We're sitting on the Goldfields pipeline for Cosmos. So I guess further to a lot of the questions that were raised this morning and decarbonising our product, we're seriously looking at the opportunities regarding the hybrid opportunities there at Cosmos. So some exciting opportunities there for our Cosmos mine.
Thanks very much, Brian. So I think, starting off, looking at sort of insights into the energy mix and the challenges that you will face as miners in the regions where you operate. I think, Zenith Pacific, at the moment we're currently building our first solar station. So it's a solar diesel hybrid at Keith's company's mine, Nova, in the Fraser Range, and that's due to be completed in the second half of this year, which will, considerably reduce the amount of diesel that's being burnt at that particular mine's power station. What I might do is, Greg, I might start with you, because you're in quite an interesting area. So just in terms of the energy mix and challenges for your operations, like what do you face out there at Lake Disappointment? And also, how do you see these challenges sort of shaping, the decisions you make around the energy mix itself?
Yeah, I guess, and because our location is fixed, obviously it's about 366 k's, 350 k's by dirt track and dirt road from Newman to the actual operation itself. So that just in terms of delivery of your energy solutions, if you opt for diesel and you're delivering diesel to site, it's seriously expensive. Obviously a hybrid solution, and we've certainly engaged with some preliminary discussions. Bear in mind we've only completed a pre-feasibility study, but some preliminary discussions around solar wind diesel hybrid and battery backup as well. And I've actually been really encouraged by what is out there and what is available. The earlier presentations today made that clear that the costs are dropping dramatically, and the solutions are, just in the period of time since DeGussa got up and running, have changed dramatically, and that they are that much more attractive. So that's one area that obviously it's almost the easiest part of the equation, or the easiest part of the problem to solve, is then powering the plant itself. It's then getting in the diesel for remote pumps for pumping the 63 gigalitres of brine that we need to pump from off-playa back into the evaporation ponds, and then powering the fleet of trucks that is harvesting anything between 4 and 20 million tonnes per annum of waste salt or crude potash to harvest to put into the plant. So those are the unknowns for us at this stage, which we don't have an answer for, but see plenty of evidence that things are changing dramatically and very quickly, which is encouraging for us.
Stuart, do you have anything to add? You're in sort of a similar position, aren't you, at where you are?
Yeah, look, it's not dissimilar at all, although we do have a bit of advantage that we're just sort of north of the Great Central Road. The feds have committed to sealing that road over the next couple of years, which is great, which makes that delivery of diesel or LNG simplified, and certainly our logistics from the site is also simplified. But nonetheless, we're dealing with the same sort of energy mix challenge. You know, you could go out on Hay Street and someone will sell you a 10 megawatt diesel plant pretty quickly, but it's not really what we want. I mean, you're not selling it either, frankly.
No, that's right.
But, you know, the trucked LNG is looking pretty appealing. You know, we're still within that space, within that delivery sort of zone. But again, following some of the news today, I'm really encouraged by what I'm learning about, you know, obviously the wind options, the solar options, you know, the price of batteries is coming down. And we'd like to integrate this into our mix.
Brian, what about yourself at Cosmo?
Yeah, as I said, we've got a 10-year mine life, which makes it a lot easier for us, I guess. It gives us time to pay back capital. So, as I said, we've got the Goldfields gas pipeline right at our doorstep with a spur right to the mine site. So we're currently in the space of looking at what those hybrid opportunities might look like. Weighing that up against the cost of gas. Obviously, we're going to take into account the fixed price of the gas pipeline, potential longer-term increase in variable cost of gas, and looking at what that means. We've had to sit back and have a good look at the 10-year project life. We've made some major changes, such as you know, we're going to be greater than 1,000 metres below the ground, so we're putting in a shaft, which is, you know, it's quite unusual for Western Australia. We're pretty new. And that displaces a fair bit of, obviously, underground diesel. But taking that into account, it still gives us the opportunity to now look at those load demands and power spikes and model those over time, particularly with the large winder motors and so forth that come along with the shaft. And there's some good presentations this morning which looked at the hybrid solutions and how battery technology can kind of take into account those spikes in power demand and reduce spin reserve. So they're the type of things that we're looking at the moment, looking at doing the, obviously getting some wind data and to make a backup project, and then sitting back and actually looking for the optimum solution. So, yeah.
Yeah, wind's a bit of a hot topic, and we'll talk about that a little later on. Paul, what about yourself in Africa? Do you sort of see similar sorts of issues to what have been raised already?
Yeah, I think depending on the specific circumstances, a lot of the mine sites or mine projects in Africa, probably particularly West Africa, are generally remote. The overwhelming theme is that the host countries do have, some power generation capacity, but frequently it's not enough. And then also the infrastructure to deliver that power isn't always up to scratch. So you might have a power line running past your front door, but it doesn't always deliver power. So I think invariably you see individual mine sites establish their own pretty much 100% backup solutions. And generally speaking, they're utilised most of the time. I think there's certain countries that do benefit from high rainfall, and run-of-river hydro is an option. When we had a gold project in the northeast DRC, Congo, we were fortunate enough to have a very large hydropower source nearby. We would have had to have built it, but at least the power was there, and that was a US 2 cents per kilowatt operating cost. But in other places, the general cost of a high-speed power solution is up to 30 cents US per kilowatt hour. So in terms of its impact on a mining project, it really puts the brakes on potentially utilising the mineral resource to its maximum extent from a technical perspective. Reduces reserve, reduces mine life, and then it sort of reduces the potential power solutions that you've got available to you because of the truncated, timeline of things. So there's a few overlaying challenges there.
It's interesting you mentioned security of supply, and you sort of, you look at places like PNG, and security of supply is an issue up there on those grids that they have. But security of supply is also an issue that we see in West Australia in areas sort of like around Kalgoorlie and that sort of region there. So, the use of diesel backup generation, is not just in Africa. We're sort of seeing that here. Now, last but not least, Keith, I'm keen to hear, particularly about how Zenith has sort of got you out, if possible.
Thanks for the opportunity to provide a sales pitch, but perhaps I won't. I just want to reflect just on a few points that were raised. Many projects, of course, have very limited options when it comes to power supply, and the choice is often self-selecting. However, it's increasingly the case that we genuinely are confronted with choices as to what the power supply looks like. And it would be disingenuous not to acknowledge the fact that cost is a large driver. But increasingly, it's not the only driver. Recently, we conducted a survey of our workforce, and part of that was because we want to attract good people to the business, the young people, and frankly, values have changed. We asked the question, what do you want our business to look like? And that informed a broader conversation that was led by the board and the executive about the sort of business we want to be. And so we are going to start making decisions. We have made decisions not just based on the economics, but more about what we regard as being right. And that's informing some of the decisions we make about power supply. So that's why we've gone down the road of pursuing PV. It's made easy given by the fact that the economics are great. Break even for us now is about 65 cents per litre diesel. So that makes the decision easy. But, I've got to say that we do and we are confronted by choices, and if we want to live up not just to our employees' expectations, but to our shareholder expectations, then we've got to be looking at other options. So when it comes to the question about what's driving the mix, it's not just about economics.
Thanks very much, Keith. Some very good points around that. Social license to operate in regions is something that gets more and more play as time goes on, and rightly so. I think moving on, what I'm keen to discuss now is carbon reduction goals, the importance of these goals, and how are they factored into the energy solutions that you're looking at your mines? Greg, if you could sort of lead off.
Yeah, I think the point was well made there in terms of firstly thinking about the impact on your costs, secondly the impact on the people you're trying to attract to ultimately work for you and who buy your products, and the way they think about your business. And how that enables you to market your products, and setting clear goals and differentiating your business by being able to say that you have tangible carbon reduction mechanisms in place, or you've actively thought about it. Of course, perhaps a bit of a criticism of juniors in general, and I reward as well, is that we are somewhat one-dimensional when we look at project solutions and we say, we're going to do a PFS, and this is what the project looks like. And that's very limiting. I come from a large company background where you have the luxury of being able to look at a whole host of different solutions as part of your PFS and assess various options, and at the end of the day choose what's better. And you obviously set up whatever the critical aspects by which you score that. And it's not just around economics, it is around social license to operate and setting clear environmental targets. And so we have to learn from that and somehow, at the junior end of town, try and act like a major, although we don't have the depth in the organisation, and be clear about what we're trying to do. And so actively internally, because we're somewhat at a bit of an impasse in terms of we're going through the final stages of our environmental permitting, and so we're holding back on pushing the button on our DFS, has provided us with a bit of an opportunity to do some left-brain thinking and think about doing things differently. And we do have some ideas internally which could dramatically transform, totally transform, in fact, the project. But, you know, we need to go through this process and then see where we sit after that. So, within the next 3 months, maybe it's a different world for us. I sincerely hope so.
Very good. Stuart, in terms of like there not being a carbon price, in Australia, or a price set on carbon, is that something that you look at, over the course of the mine's life as something that you may have to face, and does that sort of factor into your decision making?
Not so much now. As I noted, it's not a massive demand, first of all. We don't have a big mining fleet. We don't have a mining fleet. It's a couple of trucks that are harvesting salt from a nearby salt pond or harvest ponds. And after that, it's light vehicles and sort of earthworks maintenance. So it's not the big, typical mining fleet that we're accustomed to in this state. And again, there are some opportunities around the plant to obviously create some efficiencies both in the process plant and the power plant combination. But I think, on the bigger picture, and this may be a bit of a stretch, we import 500,000 tons of potash into this country. That comes from either North America or Europe. So, we have an opportunity to actually provide our homemade supply to our farmers. That's a ton of potash that isn't coming out of Saskatchewan or Amsterdam or wherever it's coming from. And all the greenhouse gas that are emitted as a matter of shipping into here. But one of the other things we're also learning, we're doing some work right now with the UWA and the West Australian Motil Farmers Association in understanding the benefit of sulfate of potash over the typical and historical use of muriate of potash. And the farmers are telling us, look, one thing we're also realizing is that we only have to apply it once. We just have to apply SOP once a year as opposed to 4 times a year or 3 times a year with the MOP. So, there's a little bit of benefit being had there as well. And we're talking, obviously the wheat belt is thousands of hectares. So you think about the energy that's required to fertilize these crops, and we're not having to do that as much with our product. So this comes into play in the big picture.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of bunker fuel that's required to move those vessels from Rotterdam around to Australia, and not just the carbon side, but also the SOx and NOx that comes out of that fuel. It's not nice stuff. Brian, what are your thoughts on this?
I guess being a key nickel player in the market in Australia, and we export our concentrate 50% overseas as well, so we need to be mindful of both Australian policy as well as international policy on carbon, for sure. We see being a nickel producer as a key part of the solution as well in the emerging battery market. But I think that we're certainly taking a long-term view with Cosmos having a 10+ year mine life, and therefore an expectation at some stage that there may be either a global or federal carbon price, and therefore, as I said before, looking at the solutions that would minimise our energy costs, which is obviously a high proportion of our operating costs, through a hybrid solution, or optimising our gas contracts going forward from the Goldfields gas pipeline is the two key things that we're looking at the moment.
Paul, what about yourself?
Our outlook is that we would like to reduce, environmental footprint as much as possible, but not to dumb down the conversation. Our primary driver would be to, get a cost-effective solution in place. The regulatory framework in Burkina Faso/Africa doesn't have anywhere near the level of sophistication as somewhere like a first world country like Australia in terms of targets, carbon reduction targets. For our company that's just starting out, and cost of capital is extremely high. It's probably sitting at probably 30 to 40%. Something that again, our primary driver would be the economics of the power solution, rather than looking too far forward into potential regime change or regulatory framework changes with pricing imposts in the future.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And yourself, Keith, what about you?
Yeah, so we collectively take the view that it's essential that there are specific goals around carbon reduction. Clearly it's a matter for the international world, the state level, whether it be nationally or locally. Clearly there needs to be greater clarity. We look forward to the resolution of the debate in WA such that there is clear guidance, both federally and at the state level, about what the carbon policy is. That debate is live now, with the EPA releasing its guidelines and the WA state government seeking submissions on its policy. So yep, we accept it's got to be there. At an enterprise level though, it's much more problematic. The notion of having simple carbon reduction goals at an enterprise level, it's hard to see how that's going to work. So clearly the conversation's got to be about reduction or offsets. Either way, it amounts to cost. So this is about generating policy where the costs are fully understood, and we make decisions mindful of what those costs are going to be. What's really clear to us though, both in terms of the recent roadshow we did with our shareholders involving our chairman, we sought feedback specifically on this issue, and it's whilst there is debate in the community, it is increasingly the case that the shareholder base wants us as a business to have a clear position in these matters as well. So, whether we like it or not, the time's coming, and we are going to have defined positions.
Thanks very much, Keith. All right, so moving on to commercial structures for these projects, a topic which is close to my heart as an IPP. Can't stress enough the wonder and how great everything will be for you if you move forward with a Boo solution. Enough of my sort of sales pitch there, but Greg, if I could start with you. In terms of these commercial arrangements, I know, for miners, they've got to be careful in how they use their own capital. Are you best placed sort of putting that capital into assets which you have other groups out there who are able to, run or actually design, build, operate in a way that, a miner may not be able to, reducing those costs. Boo versus EPC, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, the whole concept of off-balance sheet funding for certain aspects of your whole project is hugely appealing for the junior end of town. I guess when you're at the big end of town, it's always a trade-off between, is my cost of capital lower than the cost of capital of the service provider, and therefore it's a no-brainer potentially, as long as you have the in-house skills, and not necessarily do all the majors have all the right skills to do stuff themselves. So there is that trade-off, but from a junior perspective, without doubt, off-balance sheet funding, Boo solutions are hugely attractive, and whilst and we took that approach with our PFS when it came to just a straight off-the-shelf. We kept it simple, so that's just a diesel solution. Obviously, we don't see it being a diesel solution at the end of the day, not by any means. And given that we also have a long lifetime, I mean, whilst we're going through a process for a 20-year approval, the reality is this is a multi-generational project. It's hundreds of millions of tons of potash. And, so I'd like to think that, we would be there in 100 years' time. And so there's plenty of time just in its first rendition to pay back the capital through some sort of Boo arrangement. and have a transfer at the end of the 20 years or 15 years. I think 50 is probably about the sweet spot. And then the other more commonly used thing by using obviously mining fleets that are provided by the mining contractors. We certainly wouldn't be doing our own mining and harvesting of our own salt. So that's not relevant to the broader environmental discussion, but it's relevant to how we fund the project as such and try and keep the capital within limits.
Very good. Stuart, we sort of discussed sort of earlier, DNC and sort of blue options. I think one of the points that came out of that chat was that there are government groups that offer lower cost capital, better terms and those sorts of things, and those offers are available to miners through a group that's providing a boost solution, not just through an EPC solution. So, the Northern Infrastructure Fund and also the CEFC. Can you get your thoughts around those different commercial structures?
Yeah, certainly. Look, we've got a relatively long life of mine too. It's some 20 years. So naturally, we're certainly exploring the opportunity to integrate renewables into the energy mix, because that could attract the attention of the likes of the CEFC. But you gotta demonstrate pretty clearly that you're going to get at least 50%. And so that's the challenge here. And still be economic. Like we can't in our DFS bank on the fact that we're going to get funding or relatively inexpensive funding out of Clean Energy Finance Corporation. So we have to demonstrate that renewables are economic on their own. End of story. So it's this plays into the mix. But really, the blue solution is probably the standard. Certainly, of course, it takes it off our balance sheet. We get the experts to run the camp, or rather run the village. There's opportunities in the power plant. There's opportunities in the village as well. But the key there is to ensure that obviously we're getting the most efficient power plant, and we're maintaining efficiency, and allowing some flexibility in that contract that we can, as it's been noted in this conference previously, integrate new technology when it becomes available, more efficient technology. Last year in Engineers Australia magazine, there was an article about PV cells, and researchers in Queensland are suggesting that we could be getting up to sort of 40% efficiency. I'm not certain what the time frame is on this, compared to whatever we're getting right now, maybe 10 or 12%. But it's a remarkable opportunity, though, for us in the long term to get a relatively low cost installation in place. And so in that blue type of contract, naturally, we want to keep some flexibility and some openness in it. We can integrate these technologies as they become available.
Yeah, I heard you mention efficient power stations on. Just put it out there. You're not going to get any more efficient power stations than a Zenith power station. How about that for a plug? Brian, what about you?
I guess I'll just add that I think there's some opportunities there, particularly with the PPA contracts, how they're set up, how they're negotiated, particularly for longer term mine lives. When the capital has been paid off, I think there's opportunities for cheap power in the longer term, which would, if a mine's going to expand in the future, is almost free energy potentially, or a very low operational cost of energy, which I think is a real benefit. If you've got a good exploration program and you can extend your mine life, there's some real opportunities there. Potentially also the assets themselves, being the hybrid solution, or the hybrid station, could potentially be portable, that could be moved to one of your other operations in the longer term as well. So it shouldn't just be seen as a stranded asset at a particular mine site. And I guess thirdly, I see some opportunity collaborating between different players that are nearby in the future, potentially off-grid, where you can collaborate between 2 or 3 operations and potentially have your own mini-grid between the three different players, and I know a lot of those are optimised for a specific mine site and a specific load path and so forth, but there's still potentially opportunities there for collaboration, particularly for the small players that can't go out on their own.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, you know, there's scope for innovation around how power is, you know, supplied to a mine, and if, you know, you can sort of, you know, centralise the power, you know, use larger, more efficient units and supply that, like articulate that to a number of mines as opposed to have a number of, you know, small power stations. You know, there's a lot of value there for the miner, and by value I mean a lower LCOE, you know, which goes a long way to, you know, improve the NPV of the overall mining project itself. I think something else that I've noticed over the past little while is, you know, the availability of wind out in these remote areas, which has been overlooked. Like on the ground, you sort of, you know, don't see it, but as people sort of start to measure higher up at various sort of, you know, levels above 50 metres, even, you know, getting up to, you know, 100 metres, the wind resource is a lot better than people have sort of imagined historically, and I think moving forward that's something that's going to, you know, be used, you know, more and more. There are challenges in putting, you know, wind out there and integrating wind into a thermal power station, but I think a lot of the transient you know, load or generation issues that we've had to deal with, or groups have had to deal with on the PV side, are not quite as acute when you sort of look at wind and the inertia within the wind turbine and that sort of thing. But yeah, enough out of me. I want to hear from the miners, not from the power station guys. So, Paul, what were your thoughts around what we've been discussing?
I'd echo Stuart's and Greg's comments about the, you know, pulling stuff off our balance sheet as much as possible. That's, you know, far and away the best way to manage your capital loading for a junior that's about to start. I think one of the issues, and Brian alluded to it, was short mine lives. Mines invariably have a habit of extending well past their feasibility timelines, you know, doubling, tripling. But trying to get a mine going off the ground, you might only have a 6-year mine life to start with. And I think that presents a lot of challenges, particularly with a gold mine, as opposed to, you know, a 50 or 20-year potash project. It presents challenges in terms of the availability of certain solutions that, you know, could be offered, and I think it's probably a challenge to the power providers out there that if you can financially engineer a solution that, you know, provides power through a BOO type arrangement to the customer, but the customer has this short mine life to the extent that the power provider, you know, has to carry some of the load or amortise it over several projects. I think that would be a good thing. Certainly some of the power providers that I've talked to, you know, they're reluctant to, you know, introduce solar or anything, you know, anything less than sort of 6-year time frame, and, you know, some of those projects out there just cannot quite get that 6-year time frame from start. So the other issue that, and again Brian alluded to it, was the cooperation of individual mine sites. That's good and should be encouraged. But sometimes those individual mine sites that might be within the geographical location, close geographical location to one another, they're actually competitors. So probably the stronger competitor in that bunch, it's in their best interest to see the other person fail, cop high power costs, so that eventually they could, you know, drive some sort of economic benefit from it. I think in West Africa, a lot of the ground is still, it's all a bit of a, you know, chess game, and there's still jostling in terms of competitive position, certainly in our particular area. So I think might sound good in theory, but in practice, getting, you know, competitor type companies to band together to, you know, present an overall power demand, I think that's got some challenges in front of it. It's not to say that a power provider couldn't take the initiative to do that, a larger power provider that could carry some of the load on their balance sheet.
I think one of the things that I find interesting responding to tenders is that companies, through consulting engineering firms, tend to try and restrict the solutions that the IPPs can provide. So that innovation that sort of sits within our engineers and also our corporate finance guys in terms of structuring up the deals tends to be diluted by these groups that feel that they want to put a scope forward which sort of says, oh look, we want this number of 2 megawatt engines, so on and so forth. I think from what I've seen, you're better off just putting it out to the market and sort of saying, well, here's the load, we want power that's able to be supplied, to allow us to do what we need to do, and this is the term that we're looking for, and try and keep it quite broad, and then look for the innovation to come back from the power people who are the experts in providing power. Sorry, I'm getting in Keith's way. Keith, what are your thoughts on BOO versus EPC commercial structures?
The determinant in this for us was around life of mine. So we've got a project now that has 7 years left in it. Whilst our exploration engineers are eternally hopeful, one of the things we did when we set this project up was we fully drilled out the resource. So we know what we've got. So given that, and given our desire to have solar as part of our power mix, we sought a solution that was going to be cost effective. And I guess there was only one sensible solution at the end of the day, and that was a BOO arrangement. I just wanted to also just touch on wind. When we went down this path, we also looked at wind, and whilst at the time the economics of turbines and the integration of those systems into our power plant didn't work, we did do the wind surveys, and we were pleasantly surprised. Right next to our Nova operation at a height of about 100 metres, we saw a wind resource which would be more than adequate for us to drive a wind solution. So given that we're lucky enough to expand the resource through nearby exploration, that's something we'll certainly be looking at.
Thanks very much. Well, it's only 2:15, so what I was thinking was if we could open the floor up to some questions. No. We don't have any questions.
Paul Griffin. I do feasibility studies. I've got quite a strong background in mine management. The thing that I'm personally interested in is the demand management side of this whole discussion. There's opportunities for mine sites to modify how they run their operations to maximise the utilisation of, say, solar power. Any comments from the panel on that?
Oh, Stuart.
Yeah, sure. Look, as we are a brine pumping operation, for instance, we're certainly looking at the opportunity to run our pumps during the day. Will this meet our brine demand, and what does that do to our resource, or what's the capital cost of putting in more bores, for instance? On the other side, as I mentioned earlier, it's a large heat transfer situation in the plant. So to get a little bit more granular on that demand around the heat pump, looking at if we decouple some areas of the plant and the heat exchange, what does that do to the power demand? Is there the opportunity for heat capture out of the power plant and use of that heat in the plant, for instance? So it's quite a bit of detailed engineering that goes into this. It could be going well beyond sort of even feasibility, like looking at that heat and power integration is, I reckon that's a little mini study on its own.
Yeah, you do get quite a few miners who are looking at that sort of side. We have a power station in a mine called Phosphate Hill, and sometimes it's debatable whether the miner is more interested in the steam coming out of the turbines or the power itself. But waste heat recovery is certainly an area which is getting more and more attention, particularly as the cost of organic Rankine cycle units comes down. There's always, talk of, things like, Stirling engines and that sort of thing, but they're, not feasible. Size, tends to be a bit of an issue there, but also the use of the waste heat for processing. And all of this increases the efficiency of the overall power station itself. I think getting back to the question just on load management, I think one of the points of interest from a power producer on load management is where you have the ability to agree with a customer to potentially curtail part of their load. What you're able to do is increase the availability and reliability of the power station supply itself. So there's an incentive, from the power supplier to sort of, look at load management as well as, from the customer in terms of reducing their load. Did anyone else have anything they'd like to add?
Generally, a gold processing facility, tank-based type configuration would require pretty much a continuous operation, so there's not too much opportunity to operate differently during high sunlight and low sunlight hours. In the case of a heap leach, where there's quite a lot of, crushing and agglomeration type staging, we've got the option of going either way. We've toyed, just in terms of thought bubble type process, with doing a crush and stack on day shift with sunlight available, and then doing just the reticulation only on night shift. That's a potential.
Yes, I'll just add. We're certainly looking at those opportunities and looking at optimising and reducing our costs wherever we can at Western Areas. So at our Forrestania operation, we've got the BioLeach technology, which is using bacteria basically to leach the ore for our concentrate. So that really opens up a lot of doors for the newer mines where we've got lower grades, higher costs, and more material to move. So that's a real power saver and operational cost reducer at Forrestania. Early days and coming out of the theoretical side of things to a full-fledged plant in operation now at Forrestania. But certainly exciting to be able to utilise that technology and apply it to our mines going forward. Certainly in our Cosmos operation, I think I mentioned before, looking at the overall energy mix and avoiding, say, underground diesel and putting in the shaft, I think has been a big opportunity there, and therefore flowing on from that, looking at our winder motors and so forth for the shaft and optimising all those costs as well. So certainly looking at both of our operations and wherever possible reducing those energy costs and finding the optimal solution.
Over to you, Keith.
So at our operation, as is common, the bulk of the demand, of course, is associated with beneficiation, and therefore, given an extended mine life, we'd certainly look to the application of battery technologies. But another non-trivial component in terms of energy consumption is around underground ventilation. So that's been driving a broader conversation around how that can be reduced, and that of course leads to a conversation around the electrification of the underground mining fleet. An increasing body of work's been done in that space. Recently we had people in Canada looking at fully electrified underground mines, and they are seeing substantial reductions in net costs as a consequence of that, reduce ventilation costs. And then that goes to the changes to mine design, mine layout, etc., etc. So these things are all interconnected. I think there's a great opportunity here to become more sophisticated about the way we approach these things.
Perfect. Well, I think we've come to the end of our time. If you could all join me in thanking the panel, and thank you for attending today.